Hey guys, welcome back. Today we are going to be discussing Skullbreaker and more specifically how to counter him. I'm here with two experts. I have myself, we have MrFishopolis as always. Hello.
Hello. Hey, how's it going? My faves.
Very good. And we also have a very special guest. We have Jeff Gearbox, one of the top players in the world, the creator, I believe, of 513 format and number one with Maxon. Very
Uh,
impressive.
yes. Hello. I didn't create 513, but I did codify it.
That counts.
And that counts. And my name is Jeff. I go by Gearbox on the internet. My favorite champions are Maxon, Rodri, and Rangosh, and on Longshanks, I have over 20% of the ranked Maxon games on the server.
I didn't know you had that many.
All time. Over a fifth of all Maxon games.
That's excellent. Okay, well, we have to do a Maxon episode and get you back.
Of course.
Great, thanks for being here. So today we're talking about Skullbreaker. He's generally included when people are talking about champions that are above the curve, champions that you want to have in your list to kind of help guarantee that win. He's listed as one of the highest tier champions by just about everybody. And so today we're talking about what to do about him when he's on the other side of the table. How do you counter him? I think you two recently had a game in which this came up. Is that right?
Yes. We played a game on, was it Death? It was Death.
Yes,
was the scenario. And MrFishopolis had Skullbreaker, and I had Luella as my contrasting pick.
Yeah, I think Luella is widely agreed to be the strongest pick against Skullbreaker. Can you just talk a little bit about why you feel like maybe she is?
Sure. So Luella's strength is that she does auto damage to up to 3 targets, and it's primarily arc lightning that she uses as her offensive weapon, which has a couple of advantages into Skullbreaker's crew in that she has 6 dice, which is accurate enough to hit pretty much all of them, and she rolls 3 damage dice, which is generally enough to kill a 1 armor follower, which is what Skullbreaker has. So she thins the herd of his toothbearers, which he tends to be dependent on, in my experience, to maneuver into position so he can actually use his setup skills before he jaw blades. Luella gets 4, generally kills 2 toothbearers a turn, scores 4 points for it, and does it at range 2 so she can dance a little bit out of Skullbreaker's range. She also has a good armor set and a decent health pool.
All good points. I do agree. I think I've always felt like the toothbearers are his weak point, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So I do love to throw maelstroms at him in general, and Luella in particular. But you were disagreeing, Fish.
So actually, it came down to this idea, right, for me, because Jeff had both Maxon and Luella. So it's not like I would just randomly be like, yeah, hey, Skullbreaker's going to be great into this. I think Skullbreaker struggles into Luella, but I don't think Luella is a hard counter. And that's actually the debate we were having.
Mm-hmm.
Not how... Because I think if you look at Maxon versus Mournblade, you can say that's a hard counter, right? He's just going to be punished 5 ways from Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Do I think this is an unfavorable matchup? Yes. Do I think it's a hard counter? No, I don't.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that game, I banned Maxon, and I let him keep Luella. And
right.
So I have found, and you've played with me on this too. Like Skullbreaker just has so much problems getting up in Maxon's face, and Maxon has real range, whereas like Luella, you basically are gonna have to move into Skullbreaker and you're gonna sit there and then you're gonna take it. So I have an ult Basically at any time I can use to delete Luella, which I didn't end up using on Luella in that game, and Luella was at 1. And I think that Luella is not as invulnerable to someone like Skullbreaker as she is to someone like Sneaky Pete, where it's just so hard. It's very frustrating when you're rolling those 5 damage die constantly into her, what can be mostly 4 armor. Also because of her low dodge, and because of she is going to be in that 2 range proximity to Skullbreaker when she arc lightnings, you can always recruit a Toothbearer back. And you can basically reliably get that auto wound onto Luella, which is really nice from the Toothbearers, and then you can close that gap. So then Skullbreaker has the options of 2 actions to buff his damage. And as long as you can kind of get that one thing done with the Skullbreaker or the Toothbearers, you're okay. Like, does Skullbreaker love it? No, definitely not. But he still gets something out of that. Also, the Toothbearers into the Shield Maidens are great because that's an auto delete. Their dodge is super low. So I prefer. So then this is just me because I know Dave disagrees with me on this, but I prefer Skullbreaker into Luella rather than Skullbreaker into Maxon or Kira. And I think Kira is actually the worst matchup for Skullbreaker.
Is Kira the worst?
I think Kira's the hardest. What about you, Tom? What do you think?
Yeah, I do think both of these, Maxon and Luella, are strong counters for him. I don't know that anybody. I mean, you're talking about the difference between a strong matchup and I forget how you worded it, and like a hard counter.
Hard counter, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know that there's any hard counter period in the game other than Maxon into Mournblade. He just ruins Mournblade all day, and I don't think anybody else has that kind of just terrible matchup. Not that you can't. There's ways around it, depending on the rest of your Warbrand. But I think that's the hardest matchup in the game. I don't think anybody else has that steep a counter. But taking that off the table, I do think both of these are pretty good into Skullbreaker for reasons discussed. I'm wondering now, is Skullbreaker just bad, or not bad, but does Skullbreaker struggle in general into dwarves? Because I wouldn't say he's too bad on Rodri either. He probably does mess up Nia pretty bad now that I'm looking at it, but
Yeah.
The thing with dwarves, though, with Skullbreaker is actually pretty good into dwarves because they have that high armor that you need a very dynamic hit for, and he has that because
he has it
rolled into 1.
Yeah.
If you have 2 lesser, Jean is people don't roll in 3 damage dice. Get out of here with a dwarf. They're laughing at you behind their shield,
For sure, but if anybody's gonna, I mean, it's all about dice. But if anybody's gonna absorb that hit from Skullbreaker and walk away, it's gonna be one of these super high armor characters, which are the dwarves. I feel like Half Tusk could conceivably take a hit and keep standing. Not a whole lot of other people. I think it's a short list. Yeah, maybe. I think it's a short list, and I think that Rodri and Luella are both on that list.
Yeah. One thing about the dwarves that we're not talking about is their followers. Because of how low dwarven follower dodge is, it makes the Toothbearers, because they have the speed bonus, speed advantage on the dwarves, can come up and eat a dwarven follower with no problems, except for maybe a Gearhawk. And the only dwarven counter follower is actually the Shield Maidens, who roll 6 dice accuracy no matter how many of them there are, and 3 damage dice, which is their minimum damage, is probably good enough to kill a Toothbearer in exchange. So the Household Guard probably aren't going to be killing Toothbearers if they're being hit by club bashes, and the Quartzlings are definitely not going to be pulling it off. And if the Gearhawks are attacking something, you either are way ahead or way behind.
That's true. I I agree with that. Okay, so outside of dwarves, outside of these guys, who would you want to bring against Skullbreaker? Kira?
Yeah, I think so.
I've heard arguments for this, and I still am like seeing it is difficult for me. So please show me what it is, because I look at Kira and she is so squishy, and I look at her dragons and I go, that's 2 movement for 2 set up the bosses for the tooth bearers. So I think I don't disagree with the assessment that Kira is a bad matchup for Skullbreaker. I just don't see it myself.
Sure. I mean, I think like a lot of things is going to be scenario dependent, and this is my argument for it. Not that I'm the biggest proponent of it. I think one thing is that obviously one big element of Skullbreaker's kit is that he can walk through small followers. He can't walk through dragons. So Kira is actually able to block him where almost nobody else can. With 2 of them, you can box him in a bit, and they're fast enough, and they can pass through him that they can keep pace with him. So I've had good luck with Kira versus Skullbreaker in something like Quest. I wouldn't do it so much in Life, which is what we got set up here. But something where he's going to want to be moving a lot, they're able to mess with that. And then I would pair. I wouldn't go pure Kira. I would pair her with somebody like a Luella to keep the, or Maelstrom to keep the tooth bearers at bay, so the dragons aren't being eaten alive that way. And then Skullbreaker is slowed, and he's going to have to waste potentially some of his big one-time a turn attacks on followers, which is not what he wants to do. That's my argument for it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I do think it requires, so because Skullbreaker doesn't have the ability like Kira, right, to come and stomp through all these followers and sit there and push them out of the way. If you're playing Kira, and these are the things too, right? Is like if you're playing Kira, if you have other smaller followers around her, he has to either try to move through those. If you have a ring of them, you can try to force him and his positioning movements with the dragons, still get off that. And the thing with Kira then is she doesn't have to be so close to him that he can get so close to her. You can sort of build those little, in any game where you're going to all end up piled up in the middle, like Life, you're going to have a problem with that because the hexes are going to contain how you can position your followers.
Yeah, it's not unlike Maxon in that range is a big benefit.
Yeah, exactly, because I think that's the name of the game with Skullbreaker, right? Is you want to
keeping him at bay.
The fuck away from you. Anytime as someone who plays Skullbreaker, anytime you have to use that alt on a follower, or not alt, even just that regular attack, because you're also putting it there for next turn, and you're going to take the movement blight and all of this other stuff, and it feels so stupid and useless to use it on a follower, so when you can sort of manipulate Skullbreaker's movement like that, and that's why I think when you're playing him too, when you use him in a turn, changes the feeling of that whole phase, because Skullbreaker is such a big threat that you don't want to get into his range. But if you can stay out of it, he's just chasing pieces around. Like him having to use an attack on a nightshade or something is gross.
Yeah, I do. I think armor is super helpful and range is super helpful when you're dealing with Skullbreaker. I've recently played a couple games against Skullbreaker with Rangosh, and I don't think that's a great matchup for Rangosh, but where I have been successful with it, it's because I'm able to he's got a range 2 attack and Skullbreaker doesn't, and I'm able to make use of that. That seems like, I think that's one of the ways to deal with him.
What are your thoughts on that, Jeff?
I'm just looking at the board that we have here, right? Mm-hmm. This is on Life. This is just throwing pieces on the board to see what happens. And even with this, which looks like a really good Kira setup, if I get one tooth bearer throwing dice and getting 2 wounds on a dragon,
Mhm.
Suddenly, Kira gets one attack against Skullbreaker and then has to move away to get out of range of his 5/7 Jawblade, which is going to wreck her day.
But she gets an attack, the dragons get an attack on him, and she's moved away. So in the end of the day, that turn's going to be a win for Kira, if we're just talking strictly Kira versus Skullbreaker there.
Yeah, yeah. The dragons are going to throw 6 dice if Kira spends one of her plot phase actions on Regal Blessing.
Mhm.
And they're not going to hit with the 3 damage attack, 3 accuracy attack, in my opinion. And then Rain of Fire is going to do 4 straight damage dice, which is a advantage. But even if Skullbreaker is here, that throws Kira for a loop for what she's going to do next turn. So I see how it's not great for Skullbreaker. It's but I don't see it as a counter. I see it as more even because Kira has to run for her life most of the time when she really wants to be setting up in a position and being safe there.
Yeah.
So,
But so
Yeah,
if
I
I
mean,
get
this-
to roll 4 damage dice, from the young dragons, and maybe 4 damage dice, say from Rain of Fire into Skullbreaker every turn, and he doesn't get to do what he wants to do, like, let's just look at that, right? So that's, you get 2 wounds from that. And then, 1 from that, so if it's 3, even at a very low end, you are, this is turn 1, this is turn 2, you're really adding up that damage, and you're able to, like, pocket that kill pretty easy.
yeah, I can see that.
Anytime you're trying to, like, take these, and that's just 1 attack, right? If the dragons go first, and then Skullbreaker does that, then you get 2. I mean, you're rolling the dice, you maybe want to take that on Tooth Bear, maybe, but I think that's the game that's like kind of the name of the game. I think with Skullbreakers, you got to have a war of attrition, right? He's coming for you no matter what. You just have to figure out a way to, like, get all these thorns into him so that hopefully by the time you've sort of bled him out by the time he's doing something to you.
Gotta chip him down before he gets close.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's part of why Lorsan is really good into
Yes.
I think Lord Stan is also
Skullbreaker.
good. Yeah.
I'm just going to drop Lorsan here. Her ult does 2 automatic damage and rolls 8 accuracy dice. She can snipe, and she can have she can get Fairy Fire out of her Mistwood Rangers. Can she do Fairy Fire herself? Yes, she can do Fairy Fire herself, even. So he is not getting close to a scoot and shoot elf. And he
Lorsan
is
also very hard for him.
Who is?
Lorsan is definitely hard for Skullbreaker for sure.
Yeah, I think we all agreed Lorsan is good here.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm saying, yeah, that's a good call, Jeff. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, snipe is going to be really good.
I think also with that movement, she's good because I think when you talk about Skullbreaker, I think in a way you have to talk about countering Skullbreaker. I think you have to talk about countering some of his skills, right? And, like, what are Skullbreaker's skills? We can move through small followers, so he's pretty aggressive, right? He can take up a lot of space with that, and he's hard to block. So, what in terms of game design, and this is all from the Book of Fish, so it doesn't mean anything. This is not like lore or anything, but to me, in a game designer way, you're saying, okay, this is like, this guy has movement abilities because also setting up the boss and all of these other things, and a big attack. He's kind of like a catapult, you have to position him correctly and then hope he goes off. And so when we're talking about that, I think you can talk about countering one or both of those elements. And the movement one is something like with Kira, like with Lorsan, even with Max. And so you can do it, and Luella, you can do it sort of at a range, right? And you can keep yourself from getting, because I don't know a character that can stand toe to toe with Skullbreaker and, like, duke it out, maybe Half Tusk, right?
Maybe.
He's just not gonna have a good day, but he can maybe get there. So I think that you think about countering the movement, or you think about countering the damage, and the damage is obviously either a high health pool and you can heal, or armor. So I think when we look at counters like Kira and Lorsan, we're looking at ones that are going to try to pull Skullbreaker around and counter his movement abilities. Or when you look at people like Luella, etc., who have like a lot of high armor, they're trying to counter that like damage component of him. But there isn't like a total package, I think, which does both.
Yeah, I think you'd want to pair. I mean, if you're really, really focused on dealing with them, I think you'd want to pair one of these people that are able to deal damage into him, like a Half Tusk, like a Maxon, like a Lua, a Lorsan, with some kind of Maelstrom, Luella, or I'd say Fenra, a couple others who can also scoop up those tooth bears, because those are a problem if you let them run wild.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The other one that I would throw out there who might work pretty well is actually Lily.
Yeah.
Because she has that ranged push, and in particular, I'm talking about Haunting Melody, which is that ranged 2-hex push. If Skullbreaker is coming for Lily, I can hopefully get to him first with that. It's a high accuracy attack, push him 2 hexes, and that immediately negates anything the Tooth Bears can do. He's immediately down to his own base speed. And I can hopefully do more than that to mess with him, but that just undoes all the movement potential of the Tooth Bears with one action.
Yeah. Well, I think
One thing.
Yeah.
Oh God. Sorry. Go ahead, Jeff.
One thing that's common amongst all of these 6 characters we've got on the table is a high accuracy attack.
Yeah.
At least 6 accuracy dice thrown at Skullbreaker's 4 dodge, because that 4 dodge is really tough to hit with anything less than 6. 5 dice, you've got a chance, it feels like, but you can't rely on it as much as you can.
Would you say it's dicey? 5 dice, yeah, it's dicey. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I could be said to say that.
Don't quote me on that, but yes.
It's like a 20% chance to. Oh no, sorry. It's
Is that right on the chart?
It's a 2/3 chance with 5 dice into a 4, but it's an 80% chance with 6 dice into a 4.
Much better.
So it feels a lot better to throw 6 accuracy dice at least into Skullbreaker, because his armor is so low, so you are generally going to get some damage in that war of attrition you're trying to do.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
So do we recommend these 6 characters as these 6 crews as possible counters to your opponent's Skullbreaker?
I would say that this is probably not an exhaustive list, depending on what you're trying to do, but I think any of these 6 would be a healthy counter.
Yeah, I mean, you could probably, for some of the reasons that we talked about today, put Wraith on there, just because he can move around a lot and has a pretty high armor and a decent attack. I think he'd be like a tier 2 to me, because he doesn't feel like he can put pressure onto Skullbreaker.
He just dodges.
Just feels like he can just hang out with Skullbreaker in the vicinity. Yeah. But he's not. I mean, to me, I think that you kind of have to be aggressive back at Skullbreaker.
Yeah.
Try to take you, because he's so easy for your opponent to reposition because he can move through small followers. I think you sort of have to try to control what the other Skullbreaker is doing,
Yeah.
And Wraith has some good tools for that. Headbutt, accuracy boons, Tide from the Splashlings, and of course there's always Tsunami to win you the turn.
There is always Tsunami.
Yep.
Great.
Tsunami. Yeah, I mean, and also the accuracy boon, that was something, that's another reason that Maxon's scary into Skullbreaker, is because he can hand those boons out so easily.
He does. He feeds your whole team accuracy.
And, that really makes Skullbreaker just 1 extra dice. When you're going from that 5 to the 6 makes a big difference.
It
Or,
does.
So that can be super powerful, and especially against a character that relies on their dodge to try to not take that damage.
Cool, guys. Well, I think we'll hold our conversation there. We generally recommend these champions, but of course, there's a million ways to do it. When dealing with Skullbreaker, thank you very much to Jeff Gearbox for being here for this discussion, and Mr. Fishopolis, as always. And I think we'll call it there. Thanks for listening, guys. Have a good night, and keep Godtear weird.
Cheers.